Hello, welcome. We're glad to have you here this morning. You have arrived at the UW School of Medicine Ask Admissions Anything session. We have the whole admissions team here with us today. Thank you for registering for this webinar. And those of you that submitted questions ahead of time, we are really excited to be able to answer some of those questions for you. Please note that we received a ton of questions. We've tried to group them together because many of you have the same questions at this point of the admission cycle. So we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. But today we're also going to have the opportunity for you to enter your questions into the Q&A. So before we get started, I'll just tell you a little bit about me. I'm Leanna Muski. I am Salish and Kootenai. I live and work on the Flathead Indian Reservation in the northwestern part of Montana. I'm a family physician, and I have the privilege of serving as the Associate Dean for Admissions at the University of Washington School of Medicine. Really thrilled to have you here. All of my colleagues here are the admissions team that are here to answer your questions today, but not just today, throughout the entire admissions process. This is the crew of folks who are really here, willing and able to help answer any question you have about the admissions process and about the University of Washington School of Medicine. So take note that the real intention of our webinar today is to get to the really important questions that you have about the process for applying to UW School of Medicine and medical school in general. So these are admissions process questions. We're going to save questions about the School of Medicine, our curriculum, how to access different services and those sorts of things for other webinars along the way. So please check us out on all of our socials and our YouTube page where you'll find much of that information. Probably the most important resource for you, though, is our UW School of Medicine admissions website. So please, if you haven't visited there, that's always going to be our first response to any question is if you looked at the website, because it's chock full of information and most questions can be answered there. We do know, however, that every individual's path to medicine and journey is unique. And so we want to be able to help you navigate through some of those specific situations as they come as well. So please feel free to reach out to us through email, and all of that information will be posted throughout the webinar, both to our website and how to access us by email. So I believe I've covered all of the housekeeping items, team. Is that correct? And so we should just go ahead and get started with asking or answering some questions. We've prepared, like I said, you all submitted some really important questions, things that we hear a lot. And so we wanted to start with those, and then we'll get to your the questions that you have posted for us in the Q&A as they come in as well. So first of all, we had several people ask us about the timing of the application. And specifically, does applying with a fully completed application later in the cycle, they suggested mid to late September, significantly reduce your chances of being accepted? And I think our philosophy here, I mean, the straight answer, the quick answer is no. What we really want to impart on you that it's important to have your application be complete and have as much content and information about you that you need to impart to the admissions committee. So applying earlier doesn't necessarily give you a better chance if your application isn't complete or it doesn't have all of the information. So while you have the opportunity to apply with pending experiences, if those experiences are going to happen over the summer, you really probably would be better served by waiting a little while to submit your application until you complete those experiences so you can talk about them in your application. We really look for reflection. We really want to know how you're preparing, what you've learned from those experiences, and it's really much harder to do that in your application if you haven't had them yet. So we really encourage you to, think about getting, for sure, meet our deadlines, but make sure that what you're submitting really genuinely reflects who you are and what you want to impart to the committee. So if that means taking a little bit longer because you want to be thorough, you want to write it well, you want to gather all of the information that you need to submit, please do that. Any of my colleagues have anything else to add to that we get that question a lot, so I want to make sure we cover all of our usual answers. Sounds like we covered it. So Sarah, why don't you take the next question?
Sure, thank you. So one of the questions that came in is research a requirement for admissions? And I will just say that we at the University of Washington School of Medicine do not require research as part of your application. However, other schools might. And we want to make sure that you're considering all the schools that you're applying to. You want to apply broadly when you apply to medical school. So look at what the other schools require. But we don't require research. However, if you're interested in research, you should explore research. And that's generally true of all your passions and interests. You should explore those and tell us about it in your application, because we want to make sure that you really understand yourself and what you're getting into. But we don't require it, but happy to hear about it if that's something that you've looked at. Alexander, did you want to take the next one?
Sure. So this is a question that has come in, and we get this question quite a lot. So I think it's a great one to address here. And that is, does attending the University of Washington as an undergraduate student impact a student's application? So basically, do I have a better or worse chance of getting into this UW School of Medicine if I went to UW as an undergrad? So the short answer is no, it doesn't affect it. To expand on that a little bit, our committee does not have a preference in terms of where you did your undergrad. You could go to the University of Washington, you could go to the University of Montana, anywhere. Just go where the right place is for you. And that's really more important than the name of the school. Is it the school that fits you and gives you the opportunities to pursue the things that you want to pursue there? So no, it doesn't matter. You don't have to go to the UW. It's not going to give you a better or worse chance. We look at all different backgrounds for where you went equally. I believe Sonia would like to take the next one.
Sure. So someone submitted a question when they registered, which said, how can we ever prepare to write secondaries? So I take this as like being a little bit overwhelmed by the medical school application process, which makes a lot of sense. It's very daunting. It's a year-long process, as many of you know. And so we certainly get that it feels stressful and monumental. And while it might be all those things, our goal is certainly not to make it that way. We're not trying to be a black box of like secret things that happen to you. We really, really try to be transparent about our process. And that's why we have so much information on our website. Sometimes maybe there's too much information on the website because it's even hard to find and read through. But our goal is really to make sure that people know what we look for in applicants, you know, how our process works and what it all means. So the first step is, in terms of the secondaries, I would say, is we do post our secondary questions on our website. So every year they're up there now. So if it was sort of a logistical question, like how do I know what to start writing about? You can start writing about them now, even though we haven't sent out any secondaries. The sort of other advice that I would share is as both, you know, as my colleagues have said, is this process is really about you and your story. And that's what's important. So think about what's really important to you and try to figure out a way to include that information in your secondary. Of course, it's important to look at the schools that you're applying to and what their missions are. But the most important thing to our committee is this person genuine? Not is this person saying that they want to do X because that's something that the school is you know, has a focus in, right? It's much better to say, have your experiences or your interests grounded in your experiences and think about that. So I always think of sort of like a writing coach as say, if you don't know where to start, think with a list of all the things you want to say to the committee or something that's important to you, an experience that's been important to you, something that's valuable, and start from there. And then maybe look at the secondaries and think, okay, there's a question about, you know, what unique characteristics do I bring? Okay, I think I'm going to put these things that are important to me, I'm going to try to put that that essay. That's how I would approach it. That were me. I haven't applied to medical school, so I don't know, but that's how I would do it. I will pass to someone else who wants to answer a question. Sarah looks like she wants to answer a question.
Thank you. Yeah, another question that came through in the registration was, what are good questions to ask the admissions committee at the end of the interview, right? So we do a virtual interview, and in a traditional job interview, often at the end of those, the interviewee has an opportunity to ask the interviewers questions to learn about that job position, and it's really that's the only opportunity often that interviewee has to learn about the school. But during our interview process, we actually try to give our applicants lots of opportunities to learn about the school through sessions with students, with faculty, with staff. We have a lot of opportunities for our applicants to learn about the program, which is why we actually don't recommend you ask questions of our admissions committee members during the interview slot. You only get a half an hour of that interview time, and that's the interviewer's opportunity to learn about who you are and your passion for medicine. So we really, and then the people who are interviewing you aren't necessarily subject matter experts in the institution itself and the things that you might want to learn about. So we try to put you in touch with all those people at other points during the process. So instead, at the end of the interview, there's often, if time permits, you'll often have a chance to maybe add anything else that maybe didn't get covered in the interview questions that you want to make sure the committee knows about you. So there often is a moment at the end of the interview, but we do recommend you sort of using that time to talk a little bit more about you rather than ask questions, because we try to give you those opportunities elsewhere. But that is all going to be explained to you during the process itself. Once you're in the interview process, we try to give you a lot of support and information about potential interview questions, all those kinds of things to help you prepare. All that kind of support is given to you once you're in that part of the process. So you can look forward to that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Sarah. I'm just going to pause and take an opportunity to welcome folks who are joining, and just remind you that the Q&A is available for you to pop any question that you have over in there. It looks like we've answered most of them. So we have a long list of questions that you submitted ahead of time as well. We'll keep answering those, but if something comes to you or you didn't get a chance to submit a question when you registered, please feel free to just pop those into the Q&A box. The other part about, I think the difference in, being prepared to ask a question in an interview is very much when you're interviewing for a job interview, sort of corporate, you want to look like you've researched the organization. You want to, look like you, sort of are ask good questions, all of those things. If you make it to the interview aspect of the admissions process, we know you're curious. We know you have done some research, and you hopefully have an awareness of the institution. And like Sarah said, you get a lot of opportunities to ask those specific questions to other people. We want our committee members to really be able to get to know you, so reserve that time. I couldn't agree more. Reserve the time for them to be able to ask you questions, but have maybe a little elevator pitch about yourself ready at the end. You need to make some closing remarks. That's usually what they're looking for. I saw a question that I think is really important, an important question to ask and answer, and that is, what aspects of the application for medical school are most important? And I think that's a really important question, because it speaks to the whole process of medical school admissions, that there really isn't one thing. We also get the question a lot of, like, what can I do to make, my application stand out? And I sort of often caution people that sometimes the applications that stand out stand out for the wrong reason. So be careful what you're, sort of asking for and looking for. But I think when you're thinking about the whole process of medical school admissions, it's all important. So you want to be paying attention to the entire application and to the entire process. There is something about just the nature of the process that our committee and other schools are looking for. And it's more about the marathon, not the sprint, right? So it's ensuring that all aspects of your application are balanced, that they speak to who you are, that they represent you well, and the kind of person you are and the kind of physician that you want to be, and that your story makes sense. And so if you are somebody who's focused your entire preparation period on research, we'll say, and that's really your passion and excitement, don't forget to tell us also about, some of the other either interests you have or the service orientation that you might have, because you're so focused on one area. We want to know what you're really excited about and passionate about, but make sure that you're telling us all the aspects of you, because medical schools in general are looking for people who have many of those attributes, right? And what are you bringing that's important and unique to medicine? Highlight those things. Please don't just create a checklist and check off things in your application, and feel like there's some recipe that you need to follow in order to be successful in medical school, because this group will tell you, we have seen lots of applications over the course of many, many years. And we probably couldn't predict, just based on one component of an application, who would get in and who wouldn't, and who would be the right fit for our school and who wouldn't. It's a sum of the whole. So you just want to make sure that that's what you're doing. You're telling that story, and that you're not spending too much time on your letters of recommendation, or you're not spending too much time, or have some extravagant sort of way of telling your story through your personal statement because you're hoping to stand out, but then you sort of don't tell us much about anything in your experiences because you spent all your time over here. So it's a little bit more about the balance and making sure that you tell us who you are and why medicine, in particular UW School of Medicine, is the right space for you. I don't know if my colleagues have anything else to add, but I think that's an important place to start when you're thinking about med school applications.
I might actually add to that, that you can think of your application in a sense as I used to be a writing tutor, so I tend to think of it like you're writing an essay, right? And so the thesis or research question at the top of it might be something like, I would be a good physician, right? Or I would like to enter medical school, or something like that. Come up with a guiding question. And then everything else in your application is evidence that supports that thesis, right? So, your experiences section, your metrics, your personal statement, your secondary statements, they're all going to be evidence that supports that. But it's not enough just to list the evidence in a paper, right? You can't just put a quote in to a paragraph and expect that that's going to count. You're always going to get a note on the margin from your instructor that says something like, expand or tell me more, right? So likewise, in your application, you always want to explain what the evidence means and how it supports your thesis. So when you're doing your experiences section, for example, you don't just say, I was a CNA for this number of hours, and you have to tell us how that supports your thesis. So you say, in learning this experience and in doing this experience, I learned X, Y, and Z about myself, about medicine, about patient care, all those types of things to help support that thesis. So in that way, just as in, an essay, not one, everything is going to be taken as a whole to support that thesis. So that might, for some people, that might help see how it all fits together as a whole. I know that you are all submitting all those things separately, right? But when our committee gets the application, it all comes together. So everything that you submitted to AMCAS at the beginning, and then your secondaries, the letters that your recommenders sent in, it all comes as one piece, and it all is going to be taken as a whole. Consider whether you understand medicine, understand yourself, and are ready for this. Alexander, did you want to talk about, did you want to answer a question too?
Yes, so I'm going to answer kind of not just one question, but a lot of questions that we get are related to state residency. So I wanted to address that a bit, kind of explain how it all works, and hopefully answer some specific questions along the way as I do that. So backing up to like a really general overview, we have the 5-state region, WWAMI, Washington, Wyoming, Alaska, Montana, and Idaho. So the first thing to think about is, are you a legal resident of one of those states or are you not? If you are a legal resident of one of those states, then you would be applying to the cohort for that state. With Washington, that means you have a choice of either the Seattle or the Spokane cohort. For the other ones, it's one per state. So like if you're an Alaska resident, then you'll be applying for the Alaska cohort, and so on for each of the other states. If you're not a legal resident of one of those states, then when you apply, you're automatically going to be considered for the Seattle cohort specifically. And we use the term OOR, or out of region, rather than out of state, because we have that 5-state region. So because we have multiple states, region makes more sense than state for our terminology. So if you're in that case, if you're out of region, you're applying for the Seattle cohort, there are some specific requirements that you need to fulfill in order to proceed through the application process. One of those is to have a tie to one of the WWAMI states. That could be something like, we saw a question that came in earlier that was, I studied in Seattle at Seattle University, but then I went back to California and I'm going to be living there for a year before applying. Is that okay? So in that case, that applicant would have lived in Seattle, in Washington State, for 4 years, at least, presumably, as a student. That would count as a tie to Washington State. Despite the fact that you'd be applying to specifically the Seattle cohort, your tie does not have to be to Seattle or even to Washington, as long as it's to one of the WWAMI states. So if someone, for example, had, using Alaska again, they'd gone to Alaska for the undergrad, lived in Alaska for 4 years, and then went back to their home state, they would have a tie to a WWAMI state, so that would also fulfill that requirement. Some other ways can be if you have, let's say your parents live in one of the WWAMI states, or you grew up in one, but you don't live there now, you moved away. There are lots of different ways you can demonstrate having a tie. Typically, it's either being related to someone who lives in one or having lived in one yourself. Those are the two biggest things, and there are things within each of those. So those things will relate to being able to move forward in the process. We also are looking for people who have a good alignment with our mission, and a way we're looking for that is either coming from a disadvantaged background yourself or having significant service to underserved populations. So we're looking for a combination of the ties plus that mission alignment in order to move forward in the process. So there are a few, I saw there was a specific question about this. I'm going to address this a little bit too. A few differences in academic cutoffs. We do have academic cutoffs for both in-region and out-of-region applicants that are slightly different. For in-region, it's a 3.0 GPA and a 498 MCAT score. For out-of-region, it's a 3.25 GPA and a 500 MCAT score. And that GPA is your cumulative undergraduate GPA as calculated by MCAS. That's how we get that. And same scores for the BCPM, the science and math GPA. We also have those same GPA cutoff scores for those. So some of you might say, oh no, I fall slightly below that. If I were an in-region applicant, I'd be fine. I'd meet those cutoffs, but I'm just under the 500 for the MCAT, for example. In that case, there's an automatic academic cutoff that happens first, and you would receive a rejection letter at that point. However, that doesn't mean you're automatically ruled out. What you can do is you can appeal that, write back to us, say, I would like to appeal this to have a manual review of, for example, let's say it was because you had a slightly low MCAT score, but there were specific circumstances around taking the MCAT, and you also did a bunch of postgraduate work that shows that you really have a strong grasp of the science content that would be on the MCAT. Then there'd be a manual review of your application to see if, in fact, we should be putting you back into that process so that you could move forward along with your application. So again, there are lots of different questions about residency. Hopefully I answered some of those along the way with this and gave you a little bit clearer picture of that. I'm sure more will come in. We always get lots of questions about that, and I'm happy to address those as well. So I'd like to, not sure who'd like to answer the next question, but I'll hand it off to whoever would like to take the next one.
I just want to add one quick thing, that a question we often get, just a small detail, is we base all of our decision or all of our processing on AMCAS legal state of residence. So it's not your current address, your permanent address, or we have gotten all the questions. If it is, that's how we process it. So if it says Alaska as your legal state of residence, we're going to treat you as an Alaska resident until told otherwise, basically. So there are some people who may qualify for legal residency in multiple states based on the state's specific residency requirements. So in that situation, it's up to the applicant to choose which state they want to list on AMCAS, and we would process you accordingly. There are some people who don't have legal residence in any state. That also unfortunately happens, just based on, again, state residency rules. So if you have specific questions about that, you can always reach out to us, but just know that both those things can be true. And so you have to choose how you want to proceed.
And I would just add also that the admissions team actually has no role in determining and verifying somebody's state residency. So for the WWAMI states, each of them has an independent process that's run through their state of verifying somebody's residency. So that's a step in the process that has to happen for anybody who claims a legal, for most people who claim a legal WWAMI state as their legal residence. And that happens independent of the admissions office. So while we can support you and we are happy to answer questions if we can, for instance, if you are a legal resident of Wyoming, we actually have to wait for Wyoming to tell us that you're verified as a resident and you've gone through their process before we can continue to process your application. So there is a little bit of work that happens along the way. So if it seems like we're not responsive or whatever, we just have to take a pause until we hear back from each of the states that confirms your legal state of residency and that you've completed whatever they need you to complete. And I will just tell you that each state does things a little bit differently, and there are different types of processes in each state. So we're happy to orchestrate that. And again, as the team has said, happy to answer those questions because they can be a little bit confusing, particularly in everybody's own unique situation. We always, probably every season we learn something about how somebody can exist in the United States in a different way than we've seen before. But just know that that is also a step, but we have nothing to do with verifying your residency. And we're sort of at the mercy of each of the states to help us process that. All right, so there's a lot of there have been a lot of questions in the pre-registration questions, as well as I see some in the Q&A around what folks are calling gap years. And so the pause between undergraduate and applying to medical school. And what to do with that. Is it looked upon favorably? Should it be shorter or longer? How do you fit all the things you need to do into this time? So all of those different aspects. And I guess what I would say about what we like to refer to as sort of developmental time or a developmental year or two are really and I think we said this earlier, and it's a message you'll hear from us frequently, whatever webinar or video you might choose to watch, is that, we want you to be prepared. We want you to apply when you're ready and you feel like you have done appropriate preparation to be a good medical student and ultimately a good physician. We have outlined those things, what we think, what it does take to be successful in that realm. The WWAMC has a ton of information about how to prepare and what are the things you should be thinking of, but it's really a personal sort of journey, and you really need to understand yourself in terms of when you realize that you're ready. Some people can go through 4 years of undergraduate do a lot of the preparation, including volunteering and gaining clinical exposure and perhaps doing research in 4 years, and they're ready and they have the maturity and they're ready. Some of us, me included, take a little longer. We needed more seasoning. Did our undergrad, maybe it took 5 years. Maybe you needed to pause for a year and take some additional postbacc courses in order to ensure that you have adequate academic preparation in order to take the MCAT and perhaps explore clinical experiences. Perhaps it's continue or enlist in some service that is meaningful and that helps prepare you. So the time you spend between undergrad and medical school, if you're not somebody who's going to take that trajectory directly into it, should be utilized in a way that is valuable to you. So there's nothing, we don't have a checklist in our admissions committee that says, oh, they took a gap year. Well, here's what they should have done. Did they do any of these things? And if they didn't, we're not going to look at them. Likewise, we don't say, oh, look, they did all of these things during their gap year. We should let them in. It's, like I said earlier, it's the sum of the whole. Does this make sense in your story? How do you reflect on the time that you spend between your undergraduate academics and when you're arriving at medical school? What did that mean to you? How do you articulate that helped prepare you in whatever aspect, whether that's understanding yourself better, understanding people better, learning how to communicate, performing service in a way that's meaningful and helps you understand that being a physician really is a profession of service, and how do you relate that to that? Did you publish in your research, or did you just gain research exposure that allowed you to realize that you don't want to do research for the rest of your life? That's valuable too. So you take that year and you think, I'm going to do research because that's what I'm supposed to do for medical school applications. And then you get there and you're like, well, this is not what I want to do at all. That's a valuable learning lesson, and you should talk about that, and you should help us understand that this is helping you make those decisions. This is how you're preparing to be a good medical student and to be ultimately a good physician. So there is no one answer to the sort of gap year, which we will challenge you to call developmental time, because it's not a gap. You're doing something, right? It's not like hopefully you're doing something. If you're choosing to not do anything, perhaps it is a gap, and then you'll have a lot of explaining to perhaps do to the committee. But most people are spending that time. And tell us what you're doing and why it is important to you, why it makes sense, and how it fits into the sort of story of you and the tapestry of your application. And if you don't learn anything else from hearing at least me speak about medical school applications, that this is a very personal journey, and it should be for you. So don't try to do what your friend is doing because that's what you heard gets you into medical school. Because like I said before, we've looked at a lot of applications, and I bet we couldn't predict with any certainty on one item how people will do in the overall sort of success of matriculation. So do the things that are right for you, do it because it's meaningful, and then tell us about it, and that's going to be your path to success. Any other thoughts about developmental time? Seasoning time is what I like to call it. All right, who has the next question?
I asked about leadership. I'm asking, is it important for an application, and how many positions then they need to show? And I will just say that the way to reflect on this is consider, why do medical schools, or why does AMCAS include leadership as one of the options to include? What is it about medicine that is connected to leadership? And reflecting on that can kind of help you see what are the qualities in a physician that you might learn or gain experience in as by doing leadership opportunities. And I will just say, leadership doesn't necessarily mean like president of a club, right? Leadership can be a lot of different things. And that's why I encourage you to reflect on what leadership is and what kind of characteristics a good leader has. And then think, how can I demonstrate that I have those characteristics of what a good leader is in my application? So it may be that you worked as part of a team and you helped guide a team toward a solution to a problem, right? And that's something you could write about in your application, either in a secondary essay or as part of your experiences session. There are a lot of different ways to express these different sort of pieces in an application. And again, it doesn't always mean just like president of a club. And remember, in those experiences section, if it just says leadership and you don't reflect on it at all in that experiences section, if it just says leader of a club and then the description is, I was a leader of this club, I learned a lot about leadership, right? Like that's not actually helpful to us. That doesn't give us that evidence that you actually understand what it means to be a leader. So regardless of what the name of the experience is or however you want to put it in your application, talk to us about what you've learned from your experiences, about yourself, about medicine, and that's what's really going to have an impact on the committee. And they are good at the holistic review and seeing sort of the broad picture of what leadership is, but it's also up to you to sort of reflect on that yourself and demonstrate that.
I will piggyback on what both Leanna and Sarah just said to the question that someone asked in the Q&A here, but also a registration question that we got, which is about service. And sort of, is there a minimum number of hours of volunteering, or what sort of service might the admissions committee be looking for, whether that be, you know, how somebody asked about that specifically in terms of the gap year. And I would say it's the same answer as they just gave, which is that there's no one thing that the admissions committee is looking for. There's no specific number of hours that they're looking for at our program. I can't say, you know, what other schools are doing, but we don't. None of this is algorithm based, so it's not like Leanna was saying with the gap year that like, okay, there's this checklist that the committee is looking for and these applicants have met this checklist. We try to discourage applicants from thinking about the admissions process as a checklist. We also don't, that's not the way we do it for the admissions committee either. That really it is about where your interest lies, what you're passionate about doing. Service is really, really important because medicine is a service-oriented career. And so we do want to see that in an application. I would say that is something you need to have, but that really looks different for every applicant. A question we often get is, does the service need to be like, does it need to be volunteer to count as service? And the answer to that is no. So we certainly have lots of people who are unable to they don't have a lot of time to give to volunteering because they need to work, they need to do all of the other things that they need to do to make their life happen. And with the holistic review, the committee takes that into account. So they are looking at what that looks like in terms of, what did the applicant have access to? How did they choose to spend their time? And then of course, most importantly, what did they say about it? Because we have all seen applications where somebody has listed thousands of hours of some activity, and they don't say, we don't know what they took away from it. And that doesn't give us anything. And that's why we're not talking about the number of hours. We are talking about what you learned from your experiences and how you can communicate that in your written application and then also the interview.
Yeah, I think one of the things about service, well, in many aspects of your application are just, you know, when you look at it from sort of the overview, the overall view, does this tell the story of you? Does this really reflect what you think of as somebody who is prepared well and will be a good physician, a medical student and physician? And think about that from the perspective of the admissions committee, and sometimes being explicit about why you chose, how you chose to spend your time and why is helpful. There were some questions I think about, you know, how do you explain things like a dip in your grades, you know, during a particular year or semester, or the need to do postbacc work, how or if you should explain those things. And I think there's also, and we've mentioned this before, we try to do a holistic review of the applicant and try to understand, as Sonia was just saying, sort of what's the context within which this person is applying? What are the external factors and other factors that went into decisions about how to spend your time, and what were the demands and priorities you had to set in order to meet some of that? And so our committee is trained, and they do a good job of trying to take all of that into consideration, but it's also a bit of a responsibility of you as the applicant to help us understand that. Now, I say all of that, but I also think that we're also very try to be aware, and while we want to know people's stories, we also don't want to sort of exploit somebody's personal struggles or trauma or things that were difficult. We ask about things that you overcome as challenges, but you get to decide how much of the detail that you share in your application. And there is no requirement that you sort of bare your soul. We're also trying to encourage applicants to not make it about, one of my colleagues calls it sort of the trauma Olympics, right? Of like, how much you've overcome is certainly important, but the committee members, want to respect your privacy and your need to, sort of protect yourself in those ways. So don't feel compelled to tell a story for the sake of, sort of telling the story to, sort of meet the whatever you think we're looking for. It really is about, does this make sense? Give us some context, but feel free and feel empowered to also realize that it is your story, and you can tell us how much or as little as you want. So I just want that to be clear as well when we're talking about how things are laid out in the application and what you're telling us. I'm always about like, help give us context. So if your grades really suffered in your sophomore year, you're going to need to tell us a little bit about why that is. You don't have to get into the details. If you were going through some personal struggle, whether it's health related or, relationship related or family related, that's all you need to say, is that, that there were some things that influenced my ability, but I bounced back, and, here's how I overcame this, difficult time. Don't feel compelled to bare your soul. If that's not something, if you feel compelled to bear it, that's also on you as well. But just so that is clear about, sort of some of the pieces of the application. Where I was really going was, about there popped up a question about reapplicants. So, and there was also a couple of questions, I think, in the pre-registration about reapplicants. So I think this is a good time to talk about it. I'll talk briefly in just that you should, what I like to call, refresh your application. And that's basically because of what I've been saying all along, is that this is the story of you. And if you applied one year and were unsuccessful, something has to have happened in that time period between your previous application and your the current one. Tell us what that was. So you need to do a refresh. You need to update some of the things. It's helpful to kind of reflect and look to see perhaps where you missed some of the mark on your previous application and try to approach it maybe a little bit differently. If you applied to us and you were not selected, we do offer a one-time opportunity to get feedback on your application. So hopefully if you, and some schools do that, so take that seriously and take the feedback you get and try to incorporate that into your application. I don't know that they're necessarily looked at differently, except that we ask you a question that says, how did you improve your application from last year? So we really are interested in knowing that. But we take all of the same things into context, and it is a little bit about comparing you to the current, sort of pool of applicants. And so we see many people who end up not matriculating, who are on our alternate list one year, who, it just was that we don't have enough space for all of the fabulous applicants that we come into contact with. And so we can't admit everybody we want to. So we encourage people to reapply the next season and, tell us what you're doing and tell us how you're enhancing that. I don't know, team, if you have other suggestions. We get this question a lot, so I'm sure you all have other things to add.
I think we've actually come to the end of our official time that we set aside. And I see there are a couple more questions that came through. I encourage you to check the answered section, but of course, you're welcome to continue to reach out to us. We try to be an accessible group of folks, happy to answer your questions. Dr. Muski, did you want to add anything?
Sure. I would just like to once again thank you all for joining us today to learn a little bit more and ask admissions anything. I think we also learn a lot about our applicants when we host these sessions and try to tailor much of our external resources that we make available, or public resources that we make available, based on the questions you're asking. So as we've said all along, please continue to feel free to reach out to us, ask those questions, ensure that you are feeling confident about your application once you're ready to submit it, if it's in this cycle, upcoming cycle, or a future cycle. Please utilize our website as the number one resource. It's chock full, and sometimes it takes a little bit of patience with navigating, but it's because there's so much information there. So please start there. But if there's anything else we can help you with, please reach out to us. We've put our information into the chat, hopefully for you to be able to see us. We host a variety of sessions throughout the year, actually, for different groups of people, to answer different types of questions. Again, this was more about the process. If you'd like to learn more about the School of Medicine itself and the programs, we certainly host some of those kinds of sessions throughout the interview season, so please attend those. And with that, I would just say thanks again for coming, and we wish you all well. Good luck this season. See you soon.